Okay, I'm going to hit you with some graphs. Take your seats. I don't think that I need to introduce myself. I'm Noah. I run the show. Sitting over the side here is Pamela Millar. She's the Director of Client Relations and Research for BookNet Canada. And we're going to split our session in two. So we're actually going to do two talks covering 3 different research reports. So it's going to be a lot of graphs. I know after Len's graphs, you're really ready for some more. I have an interlude in my presentation, and it involves art. So we're going to completely pivot here today. So I'd like to get started with our very first survey. The very first research report I want to talk about today is our reading behavior report. So this is not book purchases. This is actual reading behavior in Canada. So every February for the last 3 years, we've gone out to 750 Canadians online, so this is an online survey, and asked them about their reading habits. So this is how much do you read, what devices do you read on, how do you find your books, things like that. So I'm going to summarize some of the data here for you today. And I've done this at other tech forums, so we now have 3 years of this data, so it's kind of getting interesting, we can trend it. So one of the very first questions we ask readers, this is not book purchases again, just readers, is how are they spending their time? And they rank a bunch of different areas. As you can see, in the last 3 years, TV watching has gone up as the #1 leisure activity that Canadians do. I don't think that comes as a huge surprise. Maybe what comes as a little bit more of a surprise is the falling reading rate. So in the last 3 years in our panel, we've seen it drop almost 4%. And this is reading just 1 book in a year. So we slice and dice in a lot of different ways. So when we look at that panel, 88% of our Canadians in our panel read a book last year. 12% didn't read a book at all. So I don't know if that comes as a shock. It shouldn't come as a huge shock. Out of the US, the Pew Internet study, or one of the Pew studies just came, and it was 76% of Americans read a book in a year. Now, the methodologies differ a little, so we may actually be closer to one another than we think. The Pew studies are done over telephone. So they actually call, I think it's 46,000 people to get 1,000 responses. We do this completely online, so we get a little bit of survey bias because to use the internet, you mostly already have to read, right? It's the way it kind of works. You don't have to, but that's the way it kind of works. And you're probably an internet user. They're maybe a little more likely to read, and when we look at the data, that's usually the way. But I think this is the first time we've actually captured just this number like this, and so we're going to watch this over time to see. And when we've looked at other studies in other countries, there's a similar, in first world or developed countries, there's a similar kind of number. Okay? So maybe a bit of a challenge. When we ask those same people what formats they read, 93% of Canadians read print, 27% listen to audiobooks, and 58% of our panel read ebooks. And when I start to talk about book buying behavior, that's going to get a little interesting because the book purchasing number doesn't come anywhere near 58%. So something's happening there. And it could be libraries, which maybe is a good thing, but it could also be something else, and so we'll look a little bit at that. We also asked them where they acquire, or this year we asked them where they acquired most of their books. Remember, this is not necessarily purchases. So out of that, and I broke it down by format here, most of them got it from online retailer for ebooks, less so for print. So 19% for print for online retailers, 66% for ebooks. Library was 20 and 18. Subscriptions, obviously not really for print books, are 6% of the market. That's something we're going to watch very closely. Physical store for print was about 45%, and then other was about 16 or 10. Okay. When we ask about what they use to read on, tablets and e-readers and general reading population are exactly equal at 34% now. So 34% use the tablet as their primary reading device, 34% use the e-reader as their primary reading device. And then the phone comes in at about 10%, computer is about 21%. Okay. Don't spend a lot of time on devices. When we look at how people read, or how much they read, people were reading books daily. 23% of Canadians were reading books daily in 2013, 21% were reading daily in 2014. So we've seen a little bit of a drop there. E-readers have actually gone up a lot. So 8% of people were reading digitally in 2013, 19% in 2014 were reading daily. And that might just have to do with the different penetration we're now getting with readers and devices. But it's changed considerably. And the one area where it's really changed, and we heard some of this morning in some of the presentations in Wattpad, and actually the year labels are wrong here, they should be up one more for each year. This is mobile reading. So the big orange bar is people that don't read it mobile at all. The different colors are the rates at which people are reading mobile. And you can see, since we started surveying actually in 2012 to 2014, it's almost doubled in mobile. That's a huge change, and we heard about that this morning in Wattpad and in some of the other presentations. When we look at the book buying stuff, you'll see that is reflected there as well. That's a big change. So I'm going to quickly switch over now. I'm going to put on the buying hat, and yes?
All that data about reading books or reading period.
Reading books. We're focused on books. Yeah. We're not magazine net, we're BookNet. So this was actually book structured content. Okay. Book buying behavior in Canada. So I've kind of touched on this before. Every quarter we survey 1,000 book buyers on their book buying behavior. It's an online survey. It's about all the purchases they made in the preceding month from when we surveyed them. Okay? So we asked a very, very detailed questionnaire. Over the last 2 years, we've asked 8,000 respondents about 24,000 book purchases. So this is a very significant data set now. It's quite large, and so we can extrapolate that data to get a lot of kind of insight, I guess. So I'd be remiss if I didn't call out the excellent work of our intern, data intern, Kayla. I don't know if she came in the room. She is a master with Excel, and she pulled a lot of this data. I often go into the in-depth on the demographics of the reader. I'm not going to do that in this presentation, except for maybe I'm going to break it out for ebooks a little bit. We do have reports coming, and one of the reports we have coming is an in-depth reader profile by genre, demographics by book buyer by genre. So that will be coming out probably next month in April. The demographics of the general book buyer in Canada haven't really changed. You can look at the ebook buyers, which I'm going to do in a second, and they trend a little bit differently, and they've been changing. But the general book buyer tends to be female, tends to be higher educated, tends to make more money, all of those things. But we have really in-depth, and I think it gets really interesting when you break it down by category and genre. And so we've done that in a report, but it can get very detailed. So 1 in 3 Canadians buy a book each month. That hasn't changed in the 2 years we've been surveying. What has changed, interestingly enough, is that in 2013, book buyers bought about 3.9 books a month. That's up from 2.87 in 2012 on about 4,000 people, about 12,000 purchases. So it's a fairly significant. Women buy more than men, a half a book more per month than men. So what did they buy? This is interesting. You can see our ebook number overall, this is across all purchases across a year, has grown about 2%. Paperback is going down, and hardcover stayed level across those 2 years. And we see that both in our consumer panel and also in our print book retail sales data panel. 18% of adult fiction was sold in ebook format. And overall, this is what ebook trendline looks like for the last 2 years in Canada. So we've bounced from about 18% of units, this is unit sales, 18% of units to about 13% of units, averaging across the 2 years. 16% of all the units were sold in ebook format or acquired in ebook format. And you've heard the plateauing and the flatlining. This is what we're seeing as well in the Canadian marketplace. And there was some talk about that this morning. We are just not seeing it rise at the rate we did before. It has been rising, but it's been rising at about 2% of units, as opposed to what it was the years before, which we don't have great data. But if we look at the US data, it grew really, really fast and plateaued off. And we're seeing a very, very similar across the 8 quarters we've been surveying. So when we break down the subject breakdown through our consumer panel, it stayed relatively the same, but 53%, this is across all binding formats, 53% of all of the books purchased were fiction, 43% were nonfiction, and there's a little bit of other, which includes juvenile off the side. We saw a significant change this year in that we lost a lot of fiction buyers and they went to nonfiction. Does anyone know why? No? Yes, it's a very Canadian thing. It was Chris Hadfield and Bobby Orr books, lifted the whole category significantly. and pulled down the other categories. And we also saw that, interestingly enough, in eBooks. So the big graph is now just the ebook subject breakdown for Canada. The little graph in the corner is the print one, so you can just compare. We saw a very significant shift that we've never seen before from fiction ebooks to nonfiction ebooks in our consumer panel. And once again, it's a lot of Bobby Orr, and it's a lot of Chris Hadfield, and it's the absence of something else. 50 Shades, right? So those three books were huge in the fiction category overall last time. So the next one may come as a little bit of a shock. Here's the average price paid according to the consumers that we ask for each book they purchased across the whole year. Okay? So this seems higher, probably, especially the ebook number, probably seems higher than anything you've seen before. I can't lie about the data, that's what the data says, but I can extrapolate a few things from this, that $11.83. One is, this is what we're asking consumers what they pay, so it includes tax most likely. So that's a whatever percentage increase, depending on which province that person was in. The other numbers, the all hardcover and paperback, tend to mimic our consumer sales data panel as well. So it's those numbers are very, very similar. The ebook number seems high to us, but that is what consumers are telling us. When we add in the $0 acquired books into ebooks, that pulls it down to $6.50. Okay, so we've removed the $0 books just for this calculation. Because when you're comparing print and ebook, there isn't many print books that are acquired for $0, right? This is book buying or purchasing. So it really makes a difference when you include those $0 books in. 41% of all of the ebooks acquired through our panel were acquired at $0. 41%. So some of those may be truly public books and they just picked them up, or there's something else going on there. It's a very significant number. Oh, and I should say, all the prices are up slightly over 2012. So all the prices went up just slightly over 2012. So one of the things we do with our consumer panel is then we ask them, what's your perception of price over the last year? Did it go up or did it go down? So the yellow indicates that the price was more than the preceding year, according to their perception, and red is less and blue is the same. So what's interesting is that prices went up, but consumers thought they went down. I could suppose that there might be some price elasticity in the market, but I'm not 100% sure. That is what the consumers are telling us. They thought prices went down, but prices went up. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on devices, but just a little change, and I think we've seen these across different panels. So our tablet readership in the general book buying public went up 14% year over year and now sits at 34%. 34% of book buyers own a tablet. That pretty much mimics the Canadian population. 29% of the Canadian book buying public owns an e-reader, and that's up 2% year over year. So the brands they own across those different devices, iPad is number 1, Kobo's number 2, and Kindle's number 3. And that's not what they're buying on or what store they're buying from. Those are the devices they own. Okay? They're very, very close, by the way. iPad, Kobo, and Kindle are within a couple percentage points of ownership. Okay? Ebook buyers primarily read on Kobo in Canada at 25%. Kindle is a little less at 23%, iPad's sitting around 14 to 12%, and desktop's just slightly under that. We've seen Kindle ownership grow in Canada, but not Kindle sales, which is kind of interesting. So there's more buyers buying Kindle devices than there are buying Kindle books, which is kind of interesting. So let's go shopping, shall we? So where did they buy? And we're always kind of curious about this one. In 2012, 37% of all the books purchased through our panel were done in physical bookstores. In 2013, that dropped by 3% to 34%. Online was 26% in 2012 and was 27% in 2013. And then other retail sits in there. So why do consumers go to particular stores? This is physical purchases, just for the physical purchases. So the number one reason is I was shopping here for other items anyway. and I decided to pick up a book. That's the Costco factor. The store is conveniently located. That's number 2. I like the selection they offer is number 3. Price is number 4. And ease of purchase is number 5, which I think is a convenience thing. So when we take these things and add them together, the number one reason that people shop at physical stores is convenience, not price or selection. It's just convenience, which is interesting. When we look at the online, it's also kind of convenience, or trust, I guess. I trust the site is number 1. The site makes it easy to purchase is number 2. They had free shipping is number 3. I like the selection of books they offer. Site makes it easy to find what I want. But price is not listed there at all, interestingly enough. So again, it's ease, trust, free shipping, maybe a price thing. You'd have to look in that a little more. And selection comes in lower. It's very much about convenience. Okay, I did say we're going to have an interlude. That's a lot of graphs. There's going to be a lot more, don't worry. But it's time for some art. Does anyone know what this picture, and this has something to, there's context here, okay? Does anyone know what this picture is? No? Okay. I'm going to read from the website that this picture came from. This painting was created by the Russian immigrant artist team Vitaly Komar and Alex Melamed. The most wanted paintings, as well as the least wanted paintings, reflects the artist's interpretation of a professional market research survey about aesthetic preferences and taste in painting. In an age where opinion polls and market research invade almost every aspect of our democratic consumer society, with the notable exception of art, Comer and Melamed's project poses relevant questions that an art-interested public and society in general often fail to ask. What would art look like if it were to please the greatest number of people? Or conversely, what kind of culture is produced by society that lives and governs itself by opinion polls? So I'm poking holes in my own argument here, or my own sales channel, but this is not what we would call paint by numbers. This is paint by analytics. And you can go to the website, which I'm going to flash up in a second, and you can actually see the survey they pushed out to a whole slew of Americans, or internet users in this case, and got back the data that they thought collectively that those people wanted in a painting. This happened in 1995, a little interesting aside I noticed. In 1995, I guess internet people were into dogs and not cats. Because this, I think if we did this survey now, we would get back cats and they would stick a cat in the bottom corner. Does anyone want to see the least wanted painting based on analytics? I assume you do. Here's the least wanted painting based on analytics. Ooh, disgusting, eh? It's hard to even fathom that, but hold it together. Here's the website. You can always go. It's an interesting little exercise, and I am bringing it up for a reason. This is opinion data. This is consumer research. We work in the arts, and so we have to take it in context with what we do. And I think when we look at supply chain and device and technology, the data is very helpful at measuring what's going on, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and so we just have to keep that in context. So back to the graphs. From art to graphs. So let's talk about who is buying ebooks in Canada. I touched on this a little bit. They're more likely to be female, they tend to be younger, they're more educated, and they have a higher income than the general book buyer. I don't think that, we've heard that before, and we actually have the numbers and we can share those later, or they're in our reports. What formats, and this is where we're starting to see some interesting stuff. Out of our panel across a whole year, 87% of our panelists bought a print book. 18% of our panelists in 2012 bought an ebook, and in 2013, 20% of all of our panelists bought an ebook. So we saw a 2% increase in digital book buyers across the 2 years, or over the 2 years, but no change in print book buyers. It didn't go down or up. And I think maybe some people are looking and saying that doesn't total 100%, but that's because some people buy both, right? So they get a mark in both categories. And then, so who buys more? That's an interesting thing. Print book buyers, as I started, they tend to be the average. They buy about 3 books per month. Digital book buyers buy 4.42 books a month. So it's significantly higher. They consume a lot more. So let's talk just a little bit about book buyers. And discovery, sorry. These days, the customer journey has grown more complex. Before making an online purchase decision, a customer may engage with your author or your brand through many different media channels over several days. what I want to show is, I don't know how many people have played with the Google Insights tool on Google. Have people played with this? It's kind of an interesting tool. So you can go in and select Canada and different retail segments or internet segments. This is media, the media customer journey. And this relates directly to the awareness data we're getting back from the customer. And this is about listening to the customer. So what this chart is showing, and I urge you to go play with this, it's 100% free. What this shows is numbers that are further along this way and have higher numbers are not necessarily the awareness or the conversion metrics that lead to a sale. They may inform the sale, but they're way further along the path to the actual sale. The sale is happening over here. And so you can see a display click means really a click on a banner ad is not a big indicator for media spend by consumers, or that leads to the purchase. And then you can see social, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We spend a lot of time on social. It goes a little bit to what Balder was talking about before. It's not a huge end step to the purchase. It informs, all of these things inform the purchase, but it isn't the end. Email is even a little more important, but still isn't the end. And then you could go and see paid search, organic search, and direct are by far heads and tails for media, the way consumers discover things. And so that goes to SEO and discoverability, right? How important those things are. You can go play with this tool. You can do Canada. You can compare it to other countries. It's kind of cool. They have other tools that are all dynamic. So 33% of total revenue comes from purchases made in more than one day for media. 47% of total revenue comes from purchases made in more than one step. So it means on that line, they don't just go email and buy. They go social media, and then they buy. So you have to be kind of invested in all these areas. Does that make sense? Awareness that results in a sale. 48% of people interact or find out about a book in an in-person method. And I'm going to break those out in a second. Online is 56% and growing significantly year to year. Okay. Print, radio, TV, I've said this before, if you're investing money in those as channels to gain awareness, it's not a great investment for you. You might have to, but. So in-person awareness, the first one is in-store. The second one is a recommendation from a friend. The third is library. The fourth is school. And the fifth is received as a gift. And the little arrows on the side, that's the change year over year. So we've seen in-store awareness go down as an indicator of sale. We've seen friend recommendations, this is in-person friend recommendations, go down. Library's about flat. We've seen school go up slightly, it's almost flat. And receiving as a gift is flat. Okay. Online awareness is interesting, and we spend a lot of time on that. And I don't have good year-over-year data on this because we added a whole bunch of online awareness selectors this year. So the number one way that people discover books online, according to our panel, is just browsing through a site. So going to a retailer site or browsing through Google or whatever, what have you, and ending up. And if we looked at that customer journey graph again, you'd see that that's near the end of the purchase cycle. So the number two is that they received a recommendation from an algorithm. So we didn't chart that as an individual item in 2012. We just started to do that in 2013. We'll continue to do that going forward. But that's interesting that the number two way is now getting a recommendation from the Amazon algorithm or the Indigo algorithm at the bottom of the page or in your emails. Authors' websites are number three. Number four was that the book was identified as a bestseller. It wasn't necessarily on the bestseller list. And number five for online is that they read about it on a blog. Okay. Publisher websites, unfortunately, are still way down. Don't want to make anyone cry. And this is very text heavy, but we also asked them the way they discover their new books, and we asked them to rank those. And so when we score out those ranks from 1,000 consumers, the number one way that they discover new books is through friends and family. Number two is browsing at large chain stores. Number three is browsing at book retailer websites. Independent bookstores, library, general retail stores, bestseller lists, critical or acclaim at book fairs and book readings, and through social networking websites is the last way they discover new books. That's what they're telling us. And it actually isn't even close to the one above it, which is very, very surprising. So we look at those social network sites. This is the rank and the order of importance, and it pretty much mimics the usage by Canadian population of those social network sites. So we saw a slight growth Across all of them, 2% awareness increase across the social network sites. That's not very much, and I think it probably just goes to social network usage across the Canadian population. But we saw huge growth in Pinterest and Instagram. It almost doubled in 1 year. And they were not insignificant numbers before, but they're very significant now. The #1 book social website, this probably doesn't come as a surprise, is Goodreads. And it doubled year over year in Canada, the usage amongst our panel. So this is book buyers. So it went from about 6% to 12% of the book buying public is active on Goodreads now. And that goes to some of the discussion we had this morning too. Any other book social site is way, way below this one. It doesn't even, they mostly don't even rate. And the two that do rate are both Facebook plugins. Okay, so they're Books Connect and Living Social, and then Library Thing is the next one down. Awareness versus subject. So this is how they become aware based on the different based on the different genre. So online is a big driver for fiction. In-person is a big driver for nonfiction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Awareness by genre, we actually break out in a report, so you can see that online is a huge driver for mystery detective awareness that leads to a purchase. Online is important everywhere, but for the genre fictions, the genre fiction categories, it tends to be very, very high. And that goes again to some of the stuff we talked about, fan fiction, Wattpad. I think there's the community aspect of those different genres. Awareness versus format, print, online, in-person, and other. So online, we've talked about this, is a huge driver for ebooks, obviously. That's where they sell, that's where they're found. It goes all over the place. So the reasons that they purchased the book, we asked them not just how they become aware of it, why did they purchase it in the end? So the #1 way is that they like the subject. #2 is that they like the author. #3 is that it's in a series and they've read the other books in the series. #4 is the price. #5 is that they looked through the book and they liked it. For ebooks, it's pretty much the same. Author and subject reverse for ebooks. So for ebooks, the #1 reason for purchase is the author. The author is the brand. #2 is subject. #3 is series, but it's even more important than it is for the print books. Price is even less of a driver for ebooks. And just coming in below price is excerpts. Excerpts are hugely important as a reason for purchase or a discovery reason. As are customer reviews. We don't see customer reviews as being even rating as a reason for purchase for print books, oddly enough, but for ebooks, it's quite high. And I can make some guesses, I don't have any data, but I'm thinking this might have something to do with some self-published authors and people getting advised on authors they may not discover in other ways, only through recommendation. So that's a really brief kind of, I think it's brief, overview of the data we have. We have tons of this data, and so this year, coming next month, we're releasing not one, but 5, 6, or 7 reports. We've broken them out into different chunks, and these will all be available on our site. Checking out Canadians is actually our Canadian readership study from a library lens. That will be coming out shortly. The others are all based off our consumer data, and they'll be out in April and be available from our site. Okay. I'm going to hand it over to Pam now, who's going to do Juvenile Studies, and then we can take some questions.
So you're going to see some duplicate of information between what I'm presenting and what Noah's been presenting. And the distinction there is this study is limited to parents and teens. So while we're asking a lot of the same questions, it's actually a different user group. This past September, BookNet released a study called Measuring Attitudes and Adoptions of Digital Content for Kids and Teens. We picked the longest title we could possibly find, which we later regretted when we were trying to tweet things. And the objective of the study is to take a look at parents and teens' attitudes towards behavior around reading and technology. So the study is quite qualitative in nature. We asked, differing a little bit from the other consumer studies, we asked more about reading habits, attitudes about reading, opinions about the advantages and disadvantages of reading digitally, app use and awareness, library use and discoverability. On the qualitative side, we did ask some questions about buying habits, but it was generally on the last book purchase, so where they purchased it and what they paid for their most recent purchase. So basically how it worked was we ran two studies simultaneously, two surveys simultaneously. The first was a children's survey that was filled out by parents. And then when we got the data back from that, we basically streamed it into two groups of kids 0 to 8 and from 9 to 13. And the thinking there was 0 to 8 is more representative of parents reading with their children, whereas 9 to 13, you're seeing a bit of a shift to independent reading. So 823 parents responded for just over 1,400 children. And we had 221 teens in the survey, and they responded directly to their own separate survey. They were very similar in content, but by running the two different tracks, it allowed us to sort of customize it for the two specific user groups. So we started off by asking parents about their own reading habits, and that allowed us to get a bit of a picture of parents' behavior and how that behavior may influence attitudes towards their children's reading. And then we asked them specifically about how much they read with their children. And so basically taking a look at what their level of engagement is in their child's reading. We found that 47% of parents said they read print books daily or at least several times a week, and 26% of parents said they read digitally on a daily to weekly basis. Then looking at parents reading to their children, this is looking at up to the age of 8, we found that 38% of parents said that they read with their child every day, and 55% read with them 5 or more days a week. When we go in and drill down a little bit on the reading habits and break out age and gender, one of the first things we see is that there's obvious differences in gender. None of this is incredibly surprising. So in this graph, what we see is girls broken out by boys, and then you can see the slices of age. And girls tend to maintain steady, reading about 5 to 7 days a week, pretty much up to the age of 8, where it starts to drop off. Boys' reading levels, in contrast, tend to drop. They start at a similar rate to girls, and you see an immediate and continual slide directly into their teen years. For the teen years, there becomes the challenge of a variety of entertainment. So books are competing with movies, music, television, apps, games. So we asked teens to rate the importance of books in their life against other forms of media. And 55% of teens said reading books for pleasure played a more or equally important role in their lives as compared to other media, which leaves us with the dreaded 45% who said that other media is more important than books. When we take a look at how families are reading, ebook readership is relatively high. 41% of parents and 27% of teens are reading digitally in some capacity. As a bit of a comparison to the US market for 2012, the Behaviour Juvenile Study found that 43% of parents read ebooks, and the Scholastic study in the US found that 41% had read an ebook. Sorry. So just as a quick aside, when we're comparing markets, it's important to pay attention to exactly what question is being asked and the methodology as well. The Bowker study was, do parents read ebooks? Scholastic was, have they read an ebook? And ours is, do they actively read ebooks? So those are all subtle differences. Interestingly, all of the numbers proved to be quite similar. Of 41% of parents who read digitally, 27% of that group read ebooks with their children. So what that means is, of all parents responding, 11% of parents are reading digitally with their children. And generally, as you can see from this, the overall response is they're still preferring to read in print, but we still do see quite an openness to moving to digital. So what we did was we broke things down and we took a look at parents who read digitally as compared to those who read in print only. And we explored how each of the groups feel about their children reading digitally. And we do find distinct differences between parents reading digitally and those who don't. Parents who read ebooks tend to have significantly less preference than those that don't. So what you're looking at here is the blue graph represents parents who read ebooks. Red is parents who don't. And this is the response for parents who prefer their children to read in print. So we're finding that it's sitting at about 47% of parents who are ebook readers prefer print as compared to 72% of parents who read print, wanting their kids to stay with that. No preference, again, we're seeing kind of that parallel shift. Not surprisingly, most parents don't want their kids to only read an ebook, so the ebook rates are sitting quite low for that. For teens, what we're finding is that the adoption to digital is actually a little bit more limited. 14% strongly prefer ebooks, 37% generally prefer print, but they are open to ebooks, and 24% either generally or strongly prefer ebooks. So overall with teens, I've got to say that there's a greater preference for print than I was expecting to see. I kind of expected that kind of being with a device, the lure of the device would be an enticement over to digital, and we're really not finding that with the data. Within the study, we spent some time looking at barriers and advantage to ebooks for teens and parents, and so this graph is broken out by parents who read in print, digitally, or with no format preference. And what we found was parents who prefer print feel very strongly that they do not want their child reading from a screen. So this is the long blue one that's kind of the strongest response. They were concerned about device damage, device usability, and cost. And regardless of their own reading preferences, parents felt similarly, and they expressed concern that ebooks are not available at the same time as print book. We did see that as a pretty strong response. For teens, we found that those who don't have a format preference or who prefer print are more likely to be concerned about losing or damaging their device and are more likely to be concerned about the cost of ebooks. For teens who read digitally, the biggest concern, and this is the same thing we heard with the parents, is that, again, titles aren't available in ebook format at the same time, or in their case, they also pointed out limited numbers of titles that are available as ebooks. So that was a notable concern. Looking towards the future, we see parents expecting the use of ebooks to be on the rise, both for themselves and for their children. 51% of parents predict their children will be reading more ebooks in the near future. In this chart, we're finding that both groups, both parents who read digitally and those that don't, expect their children to be reading at least slightly more ebooks in the future. When we asked parents about their own reading preferences, we found that those who are only reading in print, so 47% of print readers anticipate they will likely be reading ebooks in the near future. So we can see from our research that an increase in parents reading ebooks is likely going to lend itself to an increase or at least a greater openness in their children consuming additional ebooks. This is just a quick slide looking at the type of books that parents are indicating their children like most in digital format. So that was picture books followed by chapter books, interestingly activity books, and then leveled readers. So these are what they're saying that their children prefer to read. For teens, print, again, most popular format, 42% that they will still be reading print books over the next year, 10% prefer that they will mainly be reading ebooks, and 23% expect to be reading both print and ebooks equally. In our study, we break out teens who read digitally, and we find that teens who read some digital content expect that their consumption of ebook will continue to grow, but even of those that are expecting the growth, we're finding that a quarter of them are still saying that they will be primarily reading print books in a year, for the next year. So many of those who are reading digitally are not expecting to see a huge shift. There are other places in the survey that we're asking teens more generally about format, and they basically had no obvious preference. It's interesting because basically teens don't appear to be strongly committed to one format versus another. They're citing things of making their choices based on things such as convenience, price, or availability. So moving on to marketing and discoverability, when parents are buying books for themselves, their motivations are in line with what we found in the data that Noah just presented. So popular influences are liking an author's previous work, browsing in a bookstore, or seeing a book on a bestseller list. When they're choosing titles for their children, there's additional factors that they're taking in mind. So they're looking at what's going to encourage their child to read, what's the reading level, subject matter, format. So, and again, this is the same as with the overall study. The primary place that parents go is to turn to others for recommendations. This graph is broken out by the two age groups, so 0 to 8 and 9 to 13. And again, word of mouth is by far the most prevalent form of discoverability. The next line is that we're finding about 25% of parents say they tend to go it alone with no input from external sources. And for 0 to 8-year-olds, one area that stood out a little bit was that parenting magazines rated higher with the younger group than with 9 to 13-year-olds. And then shifting into the older age bracket, we're finding a much heavier reliance on school sources. So teachers, school book clubs and flyers, book sales, school librarians, and we're seeing a similar increase with public librarians. And while it isn't an incredibly high number, more notably, parents are using book reader sites such as Goodreads or Library Thing to find recommendations for older children. And sources that tend to have little impact is, again, the same ones we saw in the general survey: online advertising, TV, radio, general interest magazine ads, publisher websites, and even author sites were cited as not having a lot of impact. Looking at parents specifically, 43% of parents read sample chapters online, which is much higher than what we were finding in the regular consumer study. 18% said they'd like to do so in the future. Parents are also citing that they're active with authors online. So it's kind of interesting because in the last slide, parents are saying that they don't go to authors' site for recommendations, but 42% of parents say that they are visiting authors' websites. They are following authors on Facebook, and 16% have watched a YouTube video featuring an author or a book. All of the green portions in this graph are parents who have not participated in an activity but are interested in doing so. So they've expressed interest in attending an online author event. 27% would like to enter a book-related contest. 26% would like to watch YouTube videos featuring authors or books. So the results are indicating that the issue is not necessarily convincing parents to interact online, but getting the information in front of the right eyes. When obtaining books, parents are very active users of the library, even larger for the 9 to 13 age bracket. And again, we see an increase in book fair and book club use for the older kids, and non-retailer and used bookstores seem to rank a bit higher for younger children. For teens, we're finding multiple factors come into play. Teens come into contact with a book an average of 2.3 times before deciding to read it. Most of the recommendations are through word of mouth, followed by school, library, and 13% is receiving the book as a gift. On a final note, full disclosure, I'm a former librarian, and this is a particular interest to me. When comparing book purchases to library use, we see the importance of libraries for families. In the general study, we found that there was a considerable uptake in library use for people between the ages of 30 and 44. And some of our assumption there was that was likely families going back to the library and using it for that period of time. 94% of parents and 65% of teens bought books in the last 6 months. 68% of parents and 47% of teens use their local library. So I don't need to go through that. There, thank you.